Welcome to my presentation of this PhD that I conduct here in the University of Twente for these 4 years. So first, I want to introduce my paranims, which is Dennis and Mark. You can see it. I also want to ask you to switch off your mobiles, just in case. So what you're going to present, what you're going to attend today is the defense of research that I conduct for some Dutch organizations. We were specifically interested to understand what were the consequences of introducing one specific type of contracting for delivering public infrastructure. So you might wonder the picture here. The picture here was taken in the 60s in Amsterdam, and there are some kids cleaning the tunnels, the coin tunnel. It's not only one of the cases that I researched during these 4 years, but also makes the point that the way that you organize the delivery of public infrastructure is contingent to historical ways of organizing. So first of all, I want you to explain what is the topic I will refer to, which is public-private partnerships. You might hear this maybe in the news, maybe also in your practice, but for this research has a very specific meaning. So a public-private partnership is a contract which aims to bundle the entire life cycle in the delivery of public infrastructure. So you might have before some planning, and then once you tender the contract, you might have a contract for 25 or 30 years. So which is interesting in this kind of contracts is that this is representing the private sector, and the blue one, the public sector or the government. So the thing which is interesting is that the private sector brings money up front. So they get a loan and they can, in a way, financing the delivery of the civil works. And then once the civil works has been delivered is the moment where the public sector or the government pays back for the infrastructure. So this is a very interesting way of arranging these kind of projects, because that in a way promises that the private sector will optimize the investments that they do at the front end with the eventual investment that they will need to do for the maintenance and operation. However, which is also very interesting is that according to practitioners and also some scholars, there are a lot of controversy around the actual result of public-private partnerships. So there are fierce critics, but also enthusiastic defenders. So in that regard, let's say this variance of results triggers me to frame a question which is very relevant for organizational science and project management, is to which extent, let's say, the development and delivery of a project depends more on the way that you organize the contract, so the incentives that you place, or is more dependent on the process of managing and building relations in order, let's say, to deal with the problems that pop up when you are delivering the public infrastructure. So this is kind of tension that, let's say, triggers me to formulate this research question. Is on one hand, you have the managerial agency, the idea of governing, and the other hand, you have the organizational setup. So to which extent this organizational or governance and the governing relate to each other and reshape each other over time in the specific phase of maintenance and operation. So that phase is very important, which is supposed when you deliver the infrastructure and you have the service and the private get paid back. So this is the topic, this is the question. And then the thing that you will present today is how I defend the following results of my research. So the first thing that we did here in Twente University with the support of Rotterdam University was conducting a survey with managers of public-private partnerships here in the Netherlands. So there was they interviewed 157 managers here in the Netherlands, asking them to which extent were the contract or the relations the thing that matters in order to start the project and to lead to performance. The thing which is very interesting is that one, the results, the statistical results, we analyzed, we found that there is no direct relationship between the way that you set up the governance, the contractual governance, through the partner's contribution, neither project performance. That's why you see no significant these two lines, because they are not significant statistically. But there is a, let's say, indirect impact, which is mediated by relational aspects, like trust, that this feeling, psychological feeling of reciprocity, but also by relational knowledge, which are more like informal aspects of you organize a project. So this was the starting point that, in a way, triggers me to focus on the relationship between this, the governance structure and the governing, and specifically how, by building working relations, you deal with problems in the operational phase of public-private partnerships. So once we, let's say, had these results, we start to go into the detail of the specific project. So this is one case. You see here a military complex in Utrecht. This is Utrecht, more or less. It was procured by a DVFMO contract, public-private partnership contract. And we had the opportunity to discuss with the project managers, public and private, how they solve the situations to guarantee that the service level of the facility will be delivered. So what we found is, obviously, when you see things over time, at the beginning, you see this is a line which goes over time down. The extensive dialogue and formal adjusting were needed in order to, let's say, govern the project, and correspondingly, the trust increases and took over. But even the most interesting thing for me, because this is very known as a phenomenon in organizational science, that you basically engage in dialogue in order to build trust. What was very interesting for our research was this quote, because what the public project manager says is that they have to team up, but they had to fight against the surroundings. So yes, there is a process of learning, but also there is a process where the managers team up in order to, in a way, contain the pressures for partner organizations. So that allowed me to reframe the idea of relational governance in the following terms. First of all, that you have to take into account that this is the project managers, but they are playing like into teams, right? So the first team is the contractual and temporal relationship, but also they are still accountable for the partner organization. So this is a kind of dual position of the managers that compels them to prioritize and to find creative ways in order to deal with these two pressures. And on the other hand, obviously, there is the need to understand the interplay between governance and governing as a matter of over time. So the governance, in a way, are the background that you use in order to manage or to govern the project, and governing activity where you are developing the relations at the present with the potential or the power to change the governance in the past in the future. So then the task that I did after this stage of the research was testing this mechanism into different empirical contexts. So the first one was we compared basically 3 projects, in this case, 2 roads in the northern Netherlands and the Cohen Tunnel, which was the photo was taken some years ago. And the thing was interesting that we introduced this historical part, because we make explicit that every single project was procured with a specific policy adopted by the Rijkswaterstaat or the Ministry of Works. So for example, they have this motto back in 2002, that public-private partnerships create value through collaboration between the public and private. But then, let's say, the idea of the market took over here in the Netherlands, and the Rijkswaterstaat started to say, okay, what is important is transferring everything to the market, unless you really need to bring aspects in-house in the government. And then when I took the data, was more or less in 2016 and 17, again, the government went back to the idea that you need to build trust with the stakeholders, and this actually was the policy. So that allows me to compare 3 in different moments how the way that managers deal with problems are in a way conditioning by the policy level. And also the thing that we did is we took this idea of the research actually done by Monica in Delft University, when they use games in order to understand how people can deal with the dual pressure. So you see here that is rounds of tendering process where we simulate a market with different companies are competing for a contract. But then when one competitor wins, they have to implement here with the counterpart in the temporary organization. So here's the temporary organization, and here the permanent, let's say, a struggle for finding the procurement awards. And then we set up the game in order to, let's say, challenge people to align different pressures and stakes. So from these two different setups, we found these results. First, that in fact, managers are able to reproduce the initial way that the policy is set up, and they introduce adaptive changes, meaning there is a very strong pipe dependence. Only where is a strong change is because this was the problem of arbitration that escalate the inherent contradiction between public-private partnership organizing that rely too much in the market and the way that the Dutch, let's say, industry is organized, which is more corporative. Corporative means that the state and the private sector, they reduce the competency in order to collaborate. And then for the game, that was very interesting because we had the opportunity to play with two kind of, let's say, groups of people. One people was, let's say, more officials that they have this top-down perspective and taking the stance of a permanent organization. And we also with a contract manager that had a bottom-up perspective. And even though that the both groups, in a way, behave the same when they play the game, the reflection was way different in the sense that when you're looking for the top-down, they regard public-private partnerships, and specifically the BFMO, as a real contract that doesn't allow to build this sense of partnership because you, let's say, allocate responsibilities rather than engage this collaboration. But then in the practice of these people, even though that there's this like discrete organization of responsibilities, the daily work, like they say, pushes them to deal with problems and solve with problems and create this feeling of partnership. So this is the conclusion, and in a way, let's say, summarize the findings of my research. It says that, okay, so what is the question? The question was, to which extent governance and governing relate to each other during the maintenance phase of public-private partnerships. So like we can state that as contractual design seems not directly to impact performance, it's very important to focus on how project managers conceal contractual or organizational demands by building relations. However, these relations cannot be built by in any way. They are not totally free, but they depend on the historical ways, procurement philosophy called here, that shapes the way that they can actually, let's say, build these relationships. Therefore, change in the way that you organize society, and specifically the delivery of public infrastructure, emerge from the structural contradictions in the procurement policy, because there are structural contradictions in the procurement policy when you place them in the specific field. Creative enactment of contractual entitlements, meaning how managers understand in the implementation of contracts and give like a space for building relationships. And finally, their interest for pushing their interest. So this is all. Now they will come here. They will ask me questions. Thank you.
I hereby open this public meeting of the Doctorate Board of the University of Twente. And I do that by welcoming you all, especially the candidate and his paronyms, but also the family from Colombia who flew all the way in, colleagues from Deltares and students and friends and colleagues from the University of Twente. A special word of welcome to the members of the committee, as those who went the furthest away are from the University of Bath, Professor Röhrig, from the University College in London, Professor Davies, from the University of Antwerp, Professor Verhoest, and from our own university, Professor Toornvliet and Professor Volker. And of course also the promoters are very welcome to this committee. Dear candidate, may I ask you to take your position behind the desk in front of the audience. Are you ready to start your defense?
Yes. Dear Chairman.
Then I would like to first give the word to Professor Röhrig to start your position.
Thank you. Dear candidate, thank you so much obviously for inviting me to be part of the committee. Obviously it was a pleasure of reading the work, studying what you have done, and I think it's very, well, I guess we agree in that as well, but especially would congratulate you for selecting the topic you have selected. Public-private partnerships are obviously a very important topic, not just in the Netherlands, but across Europe and across the world. So delivering various public sector infrastructure services is obviously key. So my first question for you would be around the selection of the topic. So how did the topic emerge for you, and why did you pick that particular topic?
Okay, that's a very important question because let's say I took this task for an interest that the society had to understand what was the impact of introducing public-private partnership, which is a way of organizing that emerges in the UK, here in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. So then the specific, let's say, approach that I took, which was this understanding the interplay between contractual and relational governance, as well as agency and structure, was motivated because the field of public, project management was lacking of having a strong sociological basis for understanding this specific problem.
Okay, so why public-private partnerships? I mean, you could have studied private relationships then. So what are the specifics of PPPs then for you?
Yeah, that's also regards a matter of possibility of research. So if I'm very crude, I would say that the budget was there. But if I let's say give a space of giving where is my agency for driving a research given the constraints, I think that what I sized was the opportunity to understand something which is studied usually from the economic lenses, from the social perspective. Yeah. And that was something which is very important for me because people usually forget that the functional dimension of organizing is embedded in the meta-functional way that society, let's say, evolved over time.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree. I mean, there's has been a lot of studies on the sort of economic side, finance side of why you would engage with PPPs. Yeah, maybe following up on that, really. I mean, if you think about PPPs, as I said before, these are sort of long-term projects. You have a myriad, a number of different stakeholders, obviously involved. So, how have you, as part of your work, sort of captured and kind of encapsulate the range of different stakeholders? If you think lawyers, if you think engineers, project managers, different firms. So how have you tried to capture that, if at all?
I think that one thing that I aim to do is understanding that even though the actors are very important to understand, let's say the actual way that project develops, the first thing that you have to understand is, let's say, what are the structural relationships which are bringing them together in what we call in project management and also organizational science fields. Yeah. So what is important is not only bringing the stakeholders together, like if it were a group of individual people we are not related to anyway, but is to make, let's say, explicit how different actors are related to each other in specific positions of control and autonomy, which is actually the main point of the third chapter in my dissertation.
So to be a bit more specific, so how did you then draw the boundaries? So who was included and who is excluded when we talk about PPPs?
Yeah. The first way that I placed boundaries was disciplinary boundaries. So I focus on project management, meaning that then I reduce let's say, my lenses to the managerial practice after the delivery of works, meaning the operation and maintenance phase. On the second hand, the thing that I did was I have a specific interest for understanding the level of managers as those people who actually do the work. Okay, you have operational ones, but the people who are, let's say, making decisions and enacting the contract were the managers. So from that perspective, that actually is in the second chapter, the thing that I had to do is understanding how you can build up from the, let's say, managerial relations to a wider perspective of more bottom-up.
So do you feel you have captured all the variety of different stakeholders and their perspectives?
The point is that for me, first of all, the idea of stakeholders, if you see, I avoid to use the word stakeholders in my research. Because the thing that I try to do and make the point is that even though that you can obviously have the interest for having different perspective of the stakeholders, what do you need to capture is what is the structural way that they are related to each other. So in empirical ways, I think that it was a very important work that obviously was advanced before my supervisors in the third chapter to have the perspective of the managers as those ones who have, let's say, a first-hand understanding of how a project develops. Then what I did in the other chapters is understanding how these, let's say, the managers who are more in the, let's say, proximity of the works, they can understand how is the daily practice working, let's say, situated in the more perspective historical setting. Okay. So that's the way that I approach specifically in the last part of the.
Thank you. I mean, just to follow up on that, towards the end of your work, you're talking about sort of what constitutes success in PPPs, and you mentioned the managerial process as one of the, well, you say it's the key factor. What do you think are some of the other things that, or what is success in a PPP, first of all, and what do you think are sort of the key ingredients then?
You're referring to the fourth chapter, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so here I have to make a explanatory, let's say, a pre-explanatory introduction. Is here that, let's say, the Netherlands has very strong scholar tradition of process management from Rotterdam University. So the interest was understanding what is the thing that triggers actual performance in public-private partnerships, and they claim that is the process rather than the organization as such. So, but they say that there are few opportunities to develop this sense of partnership in concessional ones. Why? Because they say that there are no embedded, let's say, social structures that allows you to recreate the meaning. So what I did there is making the point that the way that you create this meaning of partnership is when you are dealing with problems. And managers in concessional partnership, they also deal with problems and recreate this meaning of partnership and this feeling of partnership when they're addressing problems. So it's not only in alliances when you, let's say, share risk. Obviously, I have some restrictions in my conclusions because I cannot compare public-private partnership with alliances. That's something that I didn't do well because I didn't have time and the research budget was not further.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I'll pass on to my colleague here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this for these questions. Then I would like to give the word to Professor Davis to continue the opposition.
Okay, dear candidate, first of all I wanted to echo what Jens has said, Professor Rurik has said about your work. It's a very important area of work, and we should really, and the way you've unpacked it and gone into the different mechanisms and dimensions of PPPs, particularly in the phase of the operations and maintenance, is really, really important. So the first question, given that a PPP can study, that you're studying, can last 25 or 30 years, how can the exploitation phase, that's the operations and maintenance phase, be considered a temporary project organization?
Yeah, that's actually something that I struggle with myself, to which extent is a project, or is a temporary organization or not. So then I will address the question into parts. The first part is when you go to organizational studies, they define that the most important thing of temporary organization, because they don't believe in organization anymore, because they let's say, disregard the initial framing from the Scandinavian scholarship, is that this kind of engagements that emerge from a time-bounded agreement.
Mm.
And you have that, let's say, condition formally in public-private partnerships. So even though that I know that what you are meaning is that you are transferring the risk and you're transferring the responsibility, but the interesting point that the Dutch case make is that even in that situation, you need kind of cooperation, because you have some dependency. So, for example, the case of the tunnel is a clear example that you cannot have this Bahamas model here, that you transfer all the responsibilities.
Mm.
Now, there is other discussions, like, for example, Professor Winch, which is also British, they say to which extent you take for granted that all projects are temporary organization. That's other discussion, because he claims that they are also permanent there. But that's why I assume, let's say, this conceptual frame for studying public-private partnerships.
Because the essentially it's a project, because at the beginning there's an agreement, there's an end date, and there's a goal, and so on. It's just that some firms don't last 25 to 30 years. That's why I'm pushing this. And also the the biggest project in the UK now, the chief executive of High Speed 2, is considering that a permanent organisation. So it kind of affects behaviours. If they're trying to instill the notion that this is a permanent organisation because it's lasting that long. It's interesting. But I take your point. It is defined as a project. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So, dear candidate, how does you talk a lot about uncertainty and the importance of the front end? How does uncertainty change as the PPP moves through its life cycle from implementation to exploitation?
Dear candidate, may I remind you gently that you should address your committee member with highly learned opponent?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My highly learned opponent.
No offence taken.
My highly learned opponent. So, I want to answer this question comparing two dissertations from the same case, which is the Cohen tunnel.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Thanks. So, one dissertation done here, so in Twente University, they researched the Cohen tunnel. They were in the construction phase. And in that moment, let's say, Jose, which is one colleague for us, she stated that the main problem back in the days was understanding the extent to which the construction will just fall down, because it's a tunnel, so you have the water up, so it can fall down, and that creates this tension. Yeah. So then when I'm researching, and when the managers are, let's say, going back to the problems, they never refer to that problem. The problem that they refer is actually the one that materialized in the arbitration. And the arbitration was that a problem of not getting the permission from the municipality in order to open the tunnel. So when I'm referring to uncertainty, obviously, is framed in this idea that it's not these kind of circumstances that you can define by risk, meaning probability given the past. But it's more like the idea that in other disciplines that are talking about deep uncertainty is that the future eventually doesn't resemble the past. So when you're asking me how it changes, I say as long as the project is finishing, for the people who are concerned with that project, the uncertainty also decreases. That doesn't mean that for the society the uncertainty decreases, because eventually you require like additional, let's say, services. And you see, for example, the Cohen Tunnel, that when they require additional services, the lender mechanism implies that for introducing a change is just too expensive for introducing to that contract. So I would say that if you set up the boundaries of the question in the project, so it goes down. But the idea is that when you are, let's say, delivering service to the society, you have the uncertainty of
Yeah, I mean, I thank you, and I take your point. I suppose what I'm getting at in the project management literature, there's a heavy emphasis on the front end, and in the front end, they're saying the big risks, the big, unforeseen events and things like that, unknown unknowns, are in the sort of design construction phase when the tunnel might collapse. And when you get into exploitation, the operations and maintenance, this is where things are very standardized and predictable and all of those kinds of things. And yet what you're saying is that even in those phases, there are unforeseen things, especially because they're so far into the future. And I've seen that in my own work. I've been involved in a study of the M25 private finance initiative project around London, the motorway around London. And there's lots of things that happen later on in operations. And I think too often, project management literature thinks it's all uncertainties at the front, at the beginning. But actually what you're showing is that, you have to deal with uncertainty much later on and have creative enactment and all those things. So that's good. Thank you. So, third question. So, dear candidate, how are the findings generalizable beyond the specific type of PPPs you studied?
Yeah, that's a very important question too, because let's say that even though that in my first chapter, obviously I embrace the idea of generalization because it's a positive way of thinking. Then what I do in the later chapters, which is trying to understand how a mechanism works in a context. Yeah. So what I'm, let's say, generalizing is the mechanism of the managers in the dual position dealing with different, let's say, demands, how they engage in a relationship for dealing with this. So I think that mechanism is generalizable, but you have to understand how the mechanism works in different contexts. So that's let's say, the beauty of critical realism, because, or in general, because the thing is you characterize a mechanism that exists, but eventually it's triggered or not depending on the context. So the thing that I would do, my dear highly opponent, when researching other contexts is understanding how this mechanism could be triggered given the situation where it is.
And what sort of, what theoretically, in terms of literature, where would you sort of seek to publish that? Do you have any thoughts on where you might, where you start to make this more generalizable? Is there kind of a literature that you're speaking to, type of area, theoretical area?
Can you reframe the question?
Are you trying to, is there a literature that, I'm thinking about, you want to publish in other journals, right? Do you have journals in mind where you want to publish this, for example?
Yeah, I already sent should I say like which journals I sent my last two chapters?
Don't think it matters.
No, yeah, obviously this kind of more alternative ways of understanding science is for a journal like organizational studies, or organizations even.
That's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I get that you're satisfied with the answers. Then I'd like to continue with Professor Verhoest.
Dear candidate, I want to link up with my colleagues saying that this is you did a lot of work, and I was certainly also impressed by the methods you used, so statistical analysis, case studies, multiple case studies, and also the game development. So I agree with my colleagues in that. Of course, I also have questions. My first question would be about what you actually would contribute to the debate about control and trust. You already mentioned in different parts of your PhD that control and trust are often seen as substitutes. You seem to come to a more nuanced understanding, but for me it's not exactly clear because you don't make the full circle at the end. You don't really address the debate again at the end. So what would be your take on control and trust and how they relate?
They say for if you're referring to the first chapter, the thing that the point I make is that that the contractual part that is usually regarded as a control mechanism is mediated by the relational part, and you might have there some elements of trust, which is psychological, but you also have the relational part, the relational norms that impacts partners' contribution. What I want to say there is that, in a very sociological way, is that society and social systems, they don't have relationships, but they are relationships, meaning that the way that you, for example, designs control mechanisms, it necessarily needs to be mediated by the development of relationships that might have trust or not characteristics. Then, when you're asking me what is, let's say, the contribution that I bring to the idea of contract trust is, in the third chapter, I coined this concept, which is relationing, which is obviously not very clear in the literature. But what I meant there is that when we're thinking about fields, which is also a sociological concept from Bourdieu, let's say the positions that you engage with between different actors is in terms of control of autonomy. So I make this change, slightly change, because in a structural way, what you define is positions of control of autonomy between organizational entities, which define the structure of governance. The idea of trust, then, what I do in the fourth chapter is understanding, okay, that trust obviously is a property of individuals, not of the system as such. However, what is important to understand is the development of trust working relationships necessarily needs to refer to the objective bounds of your, let's say, formal relationship. Why? Because you might have a, let's say, engagement of trust between public and private that can lead to corruptions. What? Because they are not observing what it's supposed to do as a public-private partnership. So I can have certain levels of trust, but that can deviate to the initial point. So let's say, rather than closing or giving like a specific, let's say, answer in terms of let's say, categories that at the end I'm not recognizing, because I say like the point of leaving apart the economist way of thinking is not, let's say, framing your answers in the economic way of thinking I expecting you to answer. So I will not say that it's substitutive or complementarity, because the first, let's say, my effort is bringing the frame of interpretation outside of that dichotomy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm. Okay. Maybe one follow-up question, would you then say that what you define as relational governance has nothing to do with control? Because it's related to trust, but also in relational governance, there's still control. It's informal control.
Yeah, well, if we define, my dear high opponent, control as these mechanisms that, let's say, in very functionalistic and systemic way, that is a mechanisms that you predict the behavior of a system, defining some kind of benchmarks that you use, otherwise you have a penalty of a reward. The point that I'm making is that, let me repeat again, is this way of organizing the society necessarily needs to be mediated by the idea of building relationships. And here, let me explain something. Relationship is not necessarily something positive. So this bias in the literature that is relational is necessarily positive. So it's the idea that there are relations that you build in the interaction that eventually can, let's say, accumulate some kind of, for example, critical realism use the concept of relational good, but also relational evils. So this idea that by means of your interaction, there is this surplus that you can rely in order to, let's say, take some decisions, is when this idea of trust is. But eventually, if you frame everything as a functionalist that you want to predict behavior, you can say that relational governance, as the way it's framed in the economic way of thinking, is also controlling.
Okay, I take your point. I'm not sure if I have time for 2 questions or 1 question.
Well, let's start with one and then we
Okay,
see.
okay. That's good. I will ask a methodological question. So it's
Okay.
about the statistical analysis you
Yeah.
run in your first chapter. So you use consistent partial least square modeling, structural equation modeling. You have a sample of 157, but I would consider it too small.
Yeah.
So it's 10 cases per variable you need. Of course, you do bootstrapping, but you do it
Yeah.
almost too much. It's for almost 5,000 times. And also the method is still experimental, but there is critique that it's weak for multicollinearity, even if your indicators are good for multicollinearity. So my question is, to what extent is the model that you're testing not too heavy for the data that you have? And if you can justify it more. And secondly, I wonder to what extent you can actually avoid that almost most of your variables are biased by the general feeling somebody has about the cooperation and the collaboration, because trust, satisfaction, also the relational governance mechanism, they are very close to one another once a person is positive about the collaboration.
Okay, for the second question, that we run also the test of common bias common method that you do, and then you also test to which extent there is a possibility that the common method implies that let's say the independent and dependent variable has this bias given the perspective. So we run, and eventually, let's say you can say they have a mark. I will nevertheless answer your question in 2 stages. The first one, in the entire research design of my thesis, is we take this as a first stage in order to, let's say, explore how a specific mechanism works in a specific context. The effort that all my predecessors, my research team to research, let's say, the universe of the PPPs in the Netherlands implies that you cannot just increase the sample. So that it was an effort for having, instead of identifying a sample, the universe. So that's a practical answer. And obviously then, and actually when we published, there was also this concern that to which extent the results are generable, are let's say, are robust given the small sample. Now, partial least square, the consistent partial least square is experimental, obviously comes from this university. And the point to be made there is that we use this way of analyzing statistical analysis in order to identify the mediating effects that have between the contractor and the performance. So let's say that even though if you can claim that that the sample will be not enough for making the statements that we made, let's say we took all the possible measures for guaranteeing the internal validity of the research, and also we make explicit how are what is the sample that we have, and we bring with total transparency, and also to the judge of the reader to which extent this is needed to replicate or not. But let's say in practical terms, if we kind of like if we are talking about the Dutch public partnerships, so it's that we try to increase the sample as much as we could, having all the universe.
Would you be satisfied with this answer?
Yes, I'm satisfied.
Then I will continue with the next Professor Torenvliet. Will you continue the opposition?
Mr. Rector, thank you so much. Dear candidate, I also would like to congratulate you on your study and the interesting conclusions that you've drawn. I also prepared 2 questions. One question ties directly into the methodological question of Professor Hoest, but I won't ask that question. We may discuss that later if time permits. So if the question that I prepared now takes a little more time, we can discuss that question later on during the drinks. Um, what is interesting is that you depart in your work from the duality of structure and agency, set by Anthony Giddens. And your approach is to look at structures of projects, project structures, and you collected a lot of data on Dutch projects. Now, people may behave differently in different structures, and if structures are radically different, then people may behave differently. So we're talking about the external validity of your research. The external validity of how you would interpret relational norms, trust, and control in different contexts. And that's a realist approach because norms, relations, trust may work differently in different contexts. Project context, of course. Now, I read that you were born and raised in Bogota, and
Yeah, I was there.
by coincidence, I arrived from Bogota just 2 days ago. And I
So
was
exciting.
at the Plaza Bolivar during the demonstrations.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting
I can
because
imagine.
there is a huge change now in South America, and Colombia is picking up. What the people on the streets are actually calling for in Colombia are new relational norms. It's the first P of PPP. So, well, you can imagine what the question will go to. Changes in relational structures in Colombia will ultimately boil down in changes in PPP relations in projects. The Transmilenio system in Bogota is completely over-demanded, and they're now building a metro line, contracting with the Chinese, I learned. Now, given what you've learned from all these Dutch PPP projects, and you were hired by the mayor of Bogota, what kind of important lessons would you bring with you to Colombia in terms of relational norms? Trust in Colombia may be completely different from trust in the Netherlands in PPP context. Still, you must have thought about it, I can imagine, with your background. So how can you transfer some of your interesting conclusions to the Colombian context?
That's very interesting because I'm political scientist from Colombia.
Even
Imagine that.
better.
Imagine
even
that.
better. There you go.
So you put too many layers on my recommendation.
Pick one
So
layer.
obviously, if I go back to Colombia, my perspective will be not that engineering, but obviously, let's say the phenomena that you are regarding, I would say it has like a way more complexity.
Yeah,
than
but that has strong implications for
Yeah,
the engineering
exactly.
part. It's integrated.
Second. So, well, first is if you ask me what would I recommend to my fellow connationals, the first thing that is important to understand is, and this is as an insight, not from the Dutch as a such, as a, let's say, archetype that you have to follow, because let's say I also study colonialism, and that's other question that we can have, is to understand that the models that you import, in this case from the UK, let's say, are promoted by group of interest. And that's very specific, let's say, idea that I try to develop in the third chapter, because it's the idea that you can organize, let's say, the society in a certain form. What sometimes, let's say, drives this fashionable way of procuring one project in one way or in the other. So the first thing that you have to build some awareness is what is the initial conditions where how the projects are delivered there. The thing which is interesting is that my practice in Colombia was about human rights, not in public infrastructure. So the first thing that I had to do responsibly is understand public infrastructure in Colombia. But let's say the criteria, which is very more important when you are assuming this kind of responsibilities in your country, is understanding what are the institutional bases that you are starting in order to introduce a new way of organizing projects. So then, for the specific case of Transmilenio, obviously, there are engineer aspects which are important there, also planning aspects which are important there, because if you see how let's say the metro line will cross the city, you can see that it's a just invisible line that separates, let's say, the rich from the poor.
Exactly.
So that's
There we
something.
go.
That's something that obviously, from the research that I did, well, like it goes way beyond from the boundaries.
Yeah.
But in the more engineering way, the thing that I would definitely say is, take the responsibility to understand where is the institutional basis and where is the eventual
Yeah, but my
contradiction.
question is, how can you take that responsibility if there are strong relational evils, as you call them,
Yeah.
relational issues that are wired in the structure and in the agency in Colombia itself, in the people? So trust, the word was mentioned a couple of times when I was there, corruption.
Yeah.
So when does trust as a good aspect of relational smoothing relations, driving satisfaction with the process turns into corruption?
Yeah, that's why I will answer in a theoretical way. When that's something that's also applied for other countries, is the idea of trust. If you don't understand trust in a working relationship, defined by the demands of the relationship that you are enacting, you can deviate that trust in these relational evils. So that's why, for example, the relationship that we can build trust needs to be according to the, let's say, opponent and candidate. Yeah. But obviously it can transform depending if the game that we are playing changes. If you ask me to transfer this to Colombia, I need to really understand now how my country is. I haven't been there for 3 years now. But I can imagine that when you bring, for example, corruption on the table, is something that requires more than, let's say, crafting some way of contracts, or even having this coaching. Okay, let's talk about relationships, or how let's gonna have a workshop and understand what is the trust. Because then you have to really understand what is the structure, and you have to go that right up, like over the deck and this kind of thing. So that would be very interesting.
I understand I triggered something. Mr. Rector, one very brief question with a very brief answer. Then, are you optimistic or pessimistic about developing this metro line in the next 3 years? Only pessimistic or optimistic?
But I cannot answer you as a candidate of PhD. I can answer as a Colombian who has been very far away from the country for so long.
Only 3 years. Structures will change over a long time.
I think that
But
eventually.
we'll discuss that later. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I would like to give the word to Professor Volker.
Yes, dear candidates, also congratulations from me on your interesting and innovative thesis on project governance in PPP context, in which you combine the turn to practice, temporal organization and process management approaches, and also apply different types of methodologies and including even a serious game. And in chapter 2, you claim that contractual governance enables relational governance, providing a blueprint for behavior, and then relational governance compensates the inherent limitations of contractual governance. In chapter 3, you also say that the process of value creation in a long-term agreement relies on the integrity of front-end governance design aimed at maintaining the commitment of different permanent organizations. Well, that sounds very interesting and also really relevant and scientifically sound. But if I would be the project leader of the Gelre Groen consortium that was recently awarded the DBFM project of the VIA A15, and I would call you, what would you then say to me about the design of the project governance structure that will be needed for this project, for this most recent PPP project in the Netherlands?
Okay, you refer to two specific parts of my work, and then you
But
ask me a
also
specific question.
Yes, also in relation to the fact that you identify 4 key potential conflictive situations. And of course, as a project manager, I would like to prevent the conflicts that could occur in these situations that relate to the relational versus contractual governance structures.
Yeah. Say I will answer for the last insight that you brought from my thesis. When I bring the four, let's say, moments where there are critical points when you can, let's say, do the right thing and build trust or not. What I'm pointing there is, for a manager, is, well, first of all, if you are thinking about this kind of contrast where you define service at the end, and you have to define the investments at the front end. The first thing is obviously that the critical thing is to understand when you have to introduce changes in the operation and maintenance phase. So then I have to ask you if I should give an advice when they are crafting the contract or when they are already implementing the contract, because that would be two-way different scenarios in my recommendation. So in the first one, obviously, one point I would say is that, and that's very important for the chapter 3, is that you are not completely free for defining relationships in the project, because you obviously, in a way, you are enacting the legitimate ways that the policy is organizing. So you have, like, as a manager, you are not a decision maker. That's also one point of temporary organization scholarship. So given those constraints, you have to understand what are the possibilities in order you to, let's say, solve the problems within those boundaries. And then, if you ask me to which extent, for example, I should recommend that and the contract as such should be sharing risk or transferring risk, that's something that I really need to understand in the specific context. But
if I want to design the governance structure, because I start this project as a project manager, I start to create a governance.
Yeah, but
what to do?
Yeah, but the project governance is not defined by you. It's defined by the policy.
I cannot do anything.
Exactly. It's like you have first you have to understand where, for example, if you are sharing the risk, yeah, you can define, for example, to which extent after your contract you will enact the contract in a way that you respect the contract, but you try to build the relationship. That's the, let's say, the takeaway of this thesis, that relationship needs to be based on the contract, but it cannot be reduced to the contractual entitlements, because a contract as such is a legal instrument that defines the responsibilities, eventually the liabilities between parts. So the thing that you should do is first to understand what are the mechanisms that the contract implies, ask you to perform, and then to understand if that mechanisms can be somehow blended, but that's something that you cannot design in advance. That's something that emerges in your.
Well, that doesn't sound really attractive when we educate students into project managers, and we just tell them, well, there's a context, you have to operate in it, and that's it.
I have a very strong statement in that regard. Is the idea of engineering collaboration is something that you have to be very, let's say, skeptical. And me, I'm enacting in this moment not a managerial position, but the person who brings, let's say, a critical perspective of your capacity to do things. So your, let's say, range of action is given by the contract, because you can perform, let's say, activities given by the contract, and the thing that you can do is building this kind of relationship over time, which is respecting the things that you are in paper, but thinking that you have to, let's say, fulfill a task, and that fulfilling a task cannot be reduced to comply the contract, but to engage a working relationship. So that's that principle, which is how you build relationships, is something that is not a formula, or is not a recipe. It's something that you have to, in a way, embrace some kind of ethics for understanding how you're gonna implement the contract. But there are conflicts that you cannot avoid.
So you feel fine with the fact that the project manager is often assigned to a project after the full procurement phase is over?
Dank u wel, meneer de Pedel. Dear candidates and panelists, may I invite you to take your seats again in the audience. I I adjourn this public meeting of the Doctorate Board of the University of Twente.
standing like this and you were like this. Yeah. que hai puesto? Una foto de dos niños con doble sentido. Aquí están los dos con doble sentido. Usando a los niños. Se usó como doble sentido.
I hereby reopen this public meeting of the Doctorate Board of the University of Twente. Dear candidate and participants, may I invite you to take position in front of this table. The Committee of Deans of the University of Twente, represented by us, has examined your dissertation and heard your defense. The Committee of Deans has decided, in accordance with Article 7.18 of the Law on Higher Education and Scientific Research, to admit you to the degree of doctor. I request the supervisor to perform the task with which he has been charged. Please.
Under the authority assigned to us by law and on behalf of the Doctorate Board, I grant you, Camilo Benitez Avila, the degree of doctor and all the rights that are attached to this degree. As evidence of this, I present to you this diploma, signed by Director Magnificus, the Secretary of the Graduation Committee, and all members of the committee, validated with the seal of the University of Twente.
Dear learned Dr. Benitez Avila, let me congratulate you also on behalf of the university on your acquired dignity. From now on, you have the right to use the title of doctor. This title implies that society can rely on the quality of your judgment, that you will act with integrity and transparency, and that you will communicate independently about the results and the social relevance of your work. Value the doctoralis as an honorable distinction and a well-deserved prerogative, but always remember the obligations imposed by it towards the scientific community and towards society. I will now ask the promoter to speak out the laudatio. We may be seated.
Dear Dr. Avila, best Camilo. Approximately 4 years ago, we were looking, Andreas and I, for a bright young PhD candidate for a National Science Foundation project we just started. And we first had a Skype call with you, and you sent us your resume, and we had a chat. And we were very triggered by your experience and knowledge with system dynamics, and we thought, okay, if we have you, we will go into a totally different direction, because many things have already been written on PPPs. We have done a lot of research on it, but this would give a kind of new idea, a new kind of approach on PPPs. And we thought with your background and so on, that would certainly help us to further explore PPPs. And this idea actually became a reality. The journey resulted in an excellent thesis. There are already 2 papers published, and very good papers published in high-ranked journals, and 2 others are submitted. You just explained to what journal you submitted it. I hope nobody is in the referee committee or something like that, because we might not influence people, but I'm very confident that this will certainly be published in very good journals. Your thesis is on the interplay between contractual and relational governance. It's also a field that we did a lot of research on. In a nutshell, it's actually that you need a contract to build up trust and to build up relations, but at the same time you need trust to be able to to actually develop a contract. It's very important interplay and very difficult one, the balance between that. And actually, if I look at your stuff, what you did, and we would apply that to our relationship between Andreas and me and you, it's also something about contract. We have a contract together, at the same time we are building up a relationship. And that was actually a very good example. You have to imagine that this project was part of a bigger National Science Foundation project we did together with Erasmus University. But it was looking at PPPs in infrastructure, in roads, primarily road infrastructure. And we have, of course, if you sign such a contract, you have to meet the requirements. So with you, we thought we had an excellent candidate. Suddenly, a little bit, I think, halfway the project, Camilo came to us and said, "Wow, PPPs, I'm not really interested in PPPs. And roads, who is now doing research on roads? I want to actually study cases in developing countries. I want to help the world. I want to do something on water." And Andreas and I were looking at each other. Yeah, wait a second. We have here now a contract. We have to deliver something on roads. Actually, the Highways Agency was financing it. How do we explain now that suddenly this guy wants to do something totally different? So actually, we have to use our best psychological approaches to you and try to convince you, and actually do all kinds of things. So how do you convince someone? I mean, we could pay you a little bit more, but that didn't help. Because he's not really interested in money, he said always to us. He's interested in changing the world. So anyway, we finally were lucky that we arranged that. And this actually finished in a very excellent thesis. Today also we saw how you actually were dealing with the opposition. And you like to argue all the time. So if you had a kind of new statement, you said, no, that's not true, I go another direction. So we had a lot of discussions, and that was, I think, very interesting, but at the same time also challenging to what has happened. And actually also in the thesis, this is all about managerial activity and the interactions and the relation between management and interaction. And Andreas and I were quite nervous during the course of the process, because if we discussed the paper review, we discussed the kind of outline of a theoretical paper. And then 2 weeks later on, we got a new paper review which was focusing on methodological aspects. Or we had a discussion about system dynamics, and we thought, okay, he will build on that one. And then you came with a totally new theoretical insight. So every time it was challenging. So actually we tried to learn next time not to ask you anymore about theoretical paper, but then ask you to deliver a methodological one. Then we got a theoretical one. So we always have to approach you in a different way. And it was perhaps also in the system dynamics and that dualism, that analytical dualism. It's actually like giving and taking. That we start actually to be a kind of antagonist all the time with you, just to try it a different way. But we had very rewarding discussions, and actually we had a discussion about the uncertainties, and that uncertainties actually increased during the management and the project management of the time. But the uncertainties actually increased with you until even the last moment of dissertation, because you were very much on time with it. Everybody gave already his consent or her consent. So we thought, okay, this is published a month in advance. But now, until the last moment, who decided to make some changes? Mr. Camilo. Lucky, I became very nervous on Friday. I said, where is the book? Where is the book here? But finally you succeeded. But that actually is also a kind of example how we worked. It's actually your thesis on project management, but this is not a real standard lesson on project management, where you have key performance indicators and goals, and then you have the means. It's like, and I think you also responded that you can't govern it. You don't like to govern yourself. You don't like to be, or at least we could not be in control of you. And that's, I think, the most rewarding part, that during that journey, we always came up to the end. And I think you finished on time. It's excellent work, while the journey went all kinds of directions. And I think that's also something that we learned from you. Perhaps, we have to use a different approach, and that was good. We had very intensive theoretical debates, very intensive methodological debates. You never chose the easy way. And I must admit also, as a social science from background, you often challenged me, because we had debates at a certain moment about analytical dualism, I can't even pronounce it, cycle, that Andreas and I thought, what's he talking about here? And it brought me actually a little bit back to my early times as social science, that I had these kind of debates. But as a dean of engineering, we always said, wait a second, you're in an engineering faculty here. And while we had this very theoretical discussion, so but that was rewarding in the end. It was a very dynamic time, and I think that was very good stuff. I also think if you look at your dissertation, you have a theoretical part, very in-depth theoretical discussion. That paper was also published in a very good journal. Then you had a methodological paper, which was also quite new for us and quite new for the field of PPPs. But also you designed approaches for the cases as well. And what's still is also rewarding is if you look at the cases and you look at Reset, Twijnstra-Gudde, Rijkswaterstaat, who actually sponsored this project and were very helpful also with delivering data, giving you access to cases. They really said, okay, we learned so much about this. You gave several workshops, and despite your theoretical drive and that you're totally not interested in PPPs and infrastructure, you did a great job in helping them to deliver better projects for the future. So I suppose if you would have done that with water management, it would not have worked, because also that's the contradiction of you. The things that you don't like, you're excellent on it. So I think we should say, do the rest. I don't know what will happen. So, but anyway, that was great. This is also a project in collaboration with Erasmus. I think this was also a very nice project together with Job Kopjan and Jan Klein, who unfortunately could not be here today because they had a kind of summer school, I think, today. But this was a very successful project, also in the terms of collaboration, and I hope we will be able to continue that in the future. Also would like to thank the committee members for being here. That you have traveled from UK and from Belgium to be here on time, but also the colleagues from the university. Thank you for that, and thank you for all the interesting discussions. It certainly will be the beginning. Well, we're already collaborating, but it certainly will enhance collaboration for the future. There's one thing that the last remark that I would like to make is that it was really great to have you here. But while you were standing behind the table, you were also you talked with your hands and you talked with your body language. And it was funny to see while you were discussing actually I'm also using my hands, I learned that from Camilo, but it was interesting to see in the audience that people were also mimicking you. So I think you're a kind of trendsetter here. So you're a very expressive person, and we really love that. Again, thank you for the very nice journey. Now you're moving to Deltares, you're working there now. I think they will learn a lot from you. I think also you still have to finish some papers. Well, you submitted it, but we certainly will get that's also Andreas. He said, well, I finished it, but we will get some comments, Andreas, and we will have Camilo and Andreas and I and you will certainly will have to discuss about these improvements. I hope, of course, that organization studies will agree upon it and that they will directly accept it. But I'm sure that we will have something to adjust to it. And then we have a very beautiful end of this fantastic journey. Thank you again for all the discussions and wish you all the best.
Young doctor, it's my honor to congratulate you on behalf of the University of Twente. I also have something to give you, which is the cover of your diploma, and so I can shake hands. And a book, your book, with signatures of all the members of the committee. I would like to extend my congratulations also to your family, to your friends, to your colleagues, and everybody who wants to be congratulated, of course. And big thank you to the committee. You had some difficulties with your highly learned opponents, but you compensated on one or two occasions with my dear highly learned opponent. So that's, which is a little bit too much, I would say, but that's okay. Furthermore, I noticed that you do not have any activities for project managers, and that raises the question, well, that answers the question what you would think about finishing the metro in Bogota within or after 3 years. Certainly without project managers it will be a lot longer than 3 years. I think so. Isn't it correct? Yeah, it is. Okay. So, congratulations again, and I wish you all the best and all the luck in the rest of your career. You moved to the west of the country, but that's okay. May I ask you to take your seat again in the audience? Then I will conclude the session, please. In short, we will leave this room first by the beadle and then the young doctor with his paronyms and his relatives on the first row. Then the committee will follow, and after that you may also follow us to the photo session first, and after that to a reception. I hereby close the public meeting of the Doctorate Board of University of Twente.